It's the second hour of Newsfeed AM. If you're just joining us, please do feel very welcome. So let's start here. President Cyril Ramaphosa will officially open that first G20 meeting of foreign ministers. It kicks off in Nasrec here in Johannesburg today. We expect at least 35 ministers to be in attendance at this two-day gathering, which is expected to discuss how the body can intervene in current geopolitical tensions and the debt of developing countries, amongst other things. Newzroom Afrika senior politics reporter Ziyanda Ngcobo is in Nasrec, south of Johannesburg. Ziyanda, good morning. So I want you to sketch the landscape of expectation for us. When we talk about issues like debt, I mean, we're sitting with considerable debt in South Africa. And a big talking point yesterday was, of course, our debt to GDP ratio. We're in the upper, 76% band, and the implications for that on our budget. So I wonder how the events of yesterday might make their way into the conversations unfolding here today.
Well, certainly South Africa's debt will be part of a much larger conversation around Africa's debt and the improvement of this situation on the back of that African Union summit. You'll recall that there were even, calls to create an African credit ratings agency, for an example. And of course, the opportunity to interact with other foreign ministers, the European Union also creeping up closer towards developing nations, just as the United States seems to have an aggressive approach to its diplomacy. There's plenty of opportunity to deal with issues of debt, South Africa's in particular, because, of course, we are the hosts and the G20 presidency sits with us. And let's bring in then DIRCO spokesperson Chrispin Phiri. And the question from Iman was, we've seen what just happened yesterday. We didn't have a budget table, but we were talking about how, our debt to GDP is quite high. And this is not something isolated to South Africa, but the African continent. How much of that do we expect to be a feature, given that this is an opportunity for foreign ministers to talk about how to deal with geopolitical tensions, but also dealing with the debt of this continent?
Yes, certainly one of the central topics of discussion for this G20 is reforming the multilateral financial institutions. And yesterday, interestingly, the Vice President for the EU made a very interesting remark that, the procedures for African countries to get debt is quite cumbersome, but the cost of debt compared to countries in the global north is exponential. So those are things that will certainly be of discussion here. But of course, in our case, the questions of how our debt is structured is very different. It's not necessarily the same with most African states. And I'm sure Treasury could go into that quite extensively. So it's not necessarily apples with apples, but on the whole, the multilateral system and how it deals with financing, the cost of debt financing is quite important, but also climate change financing. We have seen that President Ramaphosa has been very vocal about how there's been a lot of tokenism around how we should get just transition funding. But when the tar has to hit the road, no one comes up with the funding, and we are expected still to comply with the idea of a just transition, yet we are not given the capital to execute. So these are things that would definitely be the center of discussion throughout the year. And this meeting, as you can see, it's all systems go. This meeting will definitely kick off that agenda quite strongly, followed by the Treasury meeting, the finance ministers meeting next week as well.
I mean, it's issues of debt, it's issues of financing for climate change, which we also know that UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is quite passionate about, and also used his address at the AU General Assembly to speak on that. But there's also the aspect of infrastructure-led development, which is a commitment that has been made also by our country as we hold the G20 presidency. Again, the issues of financing become an issue, but also the seeming rift between the North and the South. How is South Africa going to bridge that? Or is it just a matter of isolating the US and not necessarily that the North and South are not understanding each other?
Well, it's a matter of centering multilateralism. We have multilateral institutions. For example, the United Nations SDG goals have been tabled by the Secretary General during the last United Nations General Assembly, and we are very far from achieving these multilateral goals, these SDG goals. So this forum as well is a very important forum that helps execute these goals and ensure that we are all able to reach a world where we have these sustainable development goals being fully implemented. So it's not a question of isolating one state or another, but ensuring that multilateralism works. And indeed, yes, we are seeing a world where some are yearning for a unipolar world, where there's just one singular world power who tells everyone what to do. But this forum, I think, will be quite central in ensuring that the multilateral systems that we work and its institutions, and there are many institutions, from the ICC to the ICJ, work in a manner that is just and that ensures that the multilateral system has credibility. So we definitely think that from a geopolitical perspective, that will be also a very topical point to drive home from here.
And certainly South Africa has also seen a lot of support from countries like France, Germany and Italy talking about this commitment to multilateralism and constitutionalism. Let's talk about the guest list for DIRCO. It's about over 30 ministers. Are you satisfied with the outcome, or are you expecting more? Just take us through the process and what we expect to see from certain countries.
Without doubt, the world's top diplomats will be here in a matter of hours discussing the most critical issues in the world. So we are quite pleased by that. And all countries are participating. Note I say countries, so there's not a singular country that has said we are not interested in participating in the G20. So that is quite significant. And we are pleased by the level of attendance. Most countries, at least 90% or 70% are sending very high-powered delegations at the highest level in this forum. So we really are pleased with that, and we really are looking forward to the robust discussions that will take place here today.
A start of many robust discussions to take place over the next coming weeks, months, until we reach that Heads of State Summit in November. But at 2 o'clock, Iman, is when we expect President Cyril Ramaphosa to open and address the first Foreign Ministers meeting of the G20 presidency.